we're so busy, it probably was a couple of hours before I finally had the audacity to like just put my hand in my pocket. And I realized like, well, a hand won't go in. They had taken our pants and they had sewn all the pockets shut.
I'm Cassandra.
And I'm Shawn.
And this is the Call Your Dad podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Call Your Dad podcast, where my daughter Cassandra and I, whose name is Shawn, are going to talk today about some jobs that we have had. And like you that are listening, quite likely the profession you find yourself in today is probably not the one that you started with when you were 14, 16, 18, 22 years old. But when we were talking about this in general a few weeks ago, we both agreed that so many of those one-off odd jobs that we've had along the way still taught us lessons that we use today, even if what we're doing is radically different from whatever that was. And so, of course, I, as a planner, made my list. You know, when I knew this was the topic, I started going through like, well, what were some of the jobs I had, you know, coming up through the system? And I can start, but if you want, I can go ahead and toss it over to you if you have one that you want to lead off with. So I'm not doing all the talking on the front end.
I'm happy to kick that off. So my first job, that's where we're going to start. My first job.
Okay.
So sophomore in high school, needed to buy a car, 16, Arby's. Arby's was my first job, fast food. And I'll never forget when you were teaching Alexander and I about like how to go get a job, right?
Yeah.
You're like, you need to dress professionally. You need to wear your collared button-down shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, I'm going to apply at Arby's. There's no way I'm going to put on a dress shirt and slacks and like some nice shoes.
Yeah. Grab your briefcase on the way out the door.
Right. Like, like, here's my resume of nothing.
Yeah. Well, but to be fair, as soon as you said your first job, I wasn't sure where you were going. You're talking about your first like W-2 job, like your first job where you sign an employment contract.
Yes.
Because previous to that, you had a lot of lowercase jobs, babysitting, you know, people, chores around people's houses. Okay, but this is the first time that you're going to get a paycheck that has
taxes
FICA, OASDI, locality taxes stripped out of it. All right.
So, and I want to say it was like $7.25 an hour. Does that sound right? Probably maybe like $7.
Could have been to you. Back when I was doing it, it was $3.35 an hour, and we were like lucky to get that.
$7.25 an hour.
That was probably minimum wage,
But yeah, I walked in, wore my shirt and my dress pants and applied and had the interview, got the job. So I remember working there and, you know, I was making the joke to one of the guys earlier. There was a song, like, I kid you not, it was maybe like 3 weeks after I started working there. There was basically like this girl rapper who came out making fun of girls who worked at Arby's. And I mean, I just wanted, and like the kids at school would sing it.
Oh, boy. Of all the fast food joints.
All of the things. But I will say working in fast food, for me at least, like, I learned to move pretty quick. Like, especially during like lunchtime.
Yeah.
You know, when people were swinging through the drive-thru, I mean, you're running, you're grabbing things, you're having to remember who asked for what and putting things in the bag. So I mean, at 16, I know.
Well, I mean, so quickly, I'll interject. I'll tie in here when you're done to my first fast food job at McDonald's. But if I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. If you have time to lean, you have time to clean.
Yeah.
You are always doing something.
Something.
Always, right? Fast food are some of the busiest people on the planet.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, I won't elaborate too much on these other places, but I ended up also working at Indy's, like Indy's Chicken.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
I remember the food. I don't remember you.
Like I
feel like you had about 30 minimum wage jobs in the course of about 18 months.
For sure. Well, I mean, when I was 16, 17, 18, I was probably the laziest person. The only reason I had a job is because you all wouldn't give me money. So like I needed money for things that I wanted, but I was lazy. I mean, the total opposite of what I am now.
Yeah.
And so I would be like, I don't want to work here anymore.
Yeah.
I'll just quit and then go work somewhere else.
Yeah.
But
and it wasn't like you were quitting a 6-figure job that you can't go out necessarily and replace the next day.
Yeah, I'm like,
if you're working at one fast food place, you know I can quit halfway into my shift on Monday and probably open at another store Tuesday
Yeah, like I
because
was
those are
just
jobs that yeah.
ready to go. So that was another one, the Indies. But anyways, McDonald's. I feel like maybe I remember some stories about
Yeah,
this. Was
so
this like your first
it was probably my
job?
first. I think it was. I worked for a while at a coffee shop called John Conti's in the mall in Kentucky. There was, I think there still are rules around like if you're under the age of 15, you can only work so many hours a week, so
Hmm.
many whatever. But the first like indefinite job I had that wasn't seasonal, where I was getting a W-2, was McDonald's.
Okay.
And the thing about this particular one, which I think is consistent with the model, is they don't hire, or at least they did not hire, 40 teenagers. They hired like, 80 of us because then they could plug our shifts in around our extracurricular
Hmm.
activities. So at the time, playing basketball and running track, you would send the manager your school and athletic
Sports schedule.
schedule, whatever, and then they would just plug you in 3 hours here, 5.5 hours there.
Okay.
Boy, I did not like it, and it was definitely a job as opposed to a career.
Hmm.
A career we would hope is something that somebody pursues because they have passion, they find purpose in it. This was only for the 3.35 an hour. Like
Yeah.
this is the only reason I was doing
Which
it.
that's crazy
I
to me.
wasn't trying to
$3.
find myself. I wasn't going there and you know serving up McRibs so I could manifest abundance. It was to get 3.35 an hour. And there was luckily one other guy there that he and I bonded real quick. And we were these almost like rogue contrarians. We, to a fault, like openly mocked other people that, maybe were taking their job a little more seriously. Our goal was what's the minimum I can do to not get fired,
Sure.
today, right?
You guys were
So
turds.
big time. Like I understand why the elders, like the 21-year-olds, did not like us.
Yeah.
We,
You
we,
all
we
were
deserved it.
annoying.
Yeah. And because of that, we typically were not shown much favoritism, obviously. So at the time I started working there, the pants that were really in style were pleated. Like pleated pants
Hmm.
were a big thing in 1990. And then you would like tight roll them, at the
Yeah.
ankle, right? You turn them into like these modified MC Hammer jumpers. Um,
Terrible.
so these new pants came online for all the employees, and we were the last to get them.
Okay.
Finally, they say, Chris, Shawn, bring your uniforms in. So we bring them in, drop them off. They'll be ready for your next shift when you guys come back. So I'm thinking, finally, I've arrived. I'm getting away from the straight leg, getting the pleated pants. I get back my next shift a couple days later, open up the bag, and it's the same pants I dropped off. Like, well, this is disappointing. They didn't get around to it. So I put them on. And at some point, again, we're so busy, it probably was a couple of hours before I finally had the audacity to like just put my hand in my pocket. And I realized like, well, a hand won't go in. They had taken our pants and they had sewn all the pockets shut because somebody had been lifting cash out of the registers.
And they
And so
just
they
thought it
just
was you.
assumed
It had to have been
surely
you
it's one of
guys.
these two idiots. And my hand on a stack of Bibles, I never took a penny from that place. Never. That is not something I would have ever done.
And what's funny is your old managers out there probably still thinking like, I swear it was that Shawn and Chris kid.
They extrapolated our laziness and mischievousness and just assumed that would lead towards like
Theft.
criminality. And that's not always the case. There's plenty of lazy people who don't commit crime.
Right.
I mean, they're lazy. They don't have the energy to steal, right? So
And there's plenty of criminals who aren't lazy.
that's right.
So,
That's right. I mean, it's a special type of commitment, to be a cat burglar that scales a high rise and steals the diamonds, right? So I didn't ever steal money. I will admit that I, as a 16-year-old, just full of worldly wisdom and philosophical perspective, knew that they were wrong to say that we were not allowed to take uneaten food home with us. As a employee at the time, if it was during your shift, like right before, right after, or if you got a break, you could get half off anything on the menu, as much as you wanted, right? But because of my schedule, basketball, track, oftentimes my shifts were Friday night, Saturday night, like after games or after track meets.
When it's busy.
Yeah, and then we would close. So we'd be there. We might, turn the lights off at 1 a.m. on the exterior, but we'd be there till like 2:30
Mhm.
cleaning up. Well, Friday and Saturday night is also when a lot of people have parties in high school. So what I would do is I'm looking at slides that are full of Big Macs, quarter pounders, fish sandwiches. There's a huge bucket full of fries down in the oil. And so what I would do is I would tell buddies of mine, like, all right, I'm closing tonight. I will be taking out the trash at exactly 1:17 a.m. And this was in a day before cell
Yeah.
phones. You had to plan ahead.
Yeah.
If you wanted a tactical operation to unfold, everybody had to really be diligent, stick to the
They have to
timeline.
really hone in on like,
So there I am with a Glad bag. I've got like 55 gallons of fast food and I'm walking out to the dumpster. And then my buddy would, pull through and I would just like drop the bag into his back seat. I'd finish closing up. Then I would go to wherever the party was. I'd show up at somebody's house, somebody's parents' house who were out of town. And it looked like a McDonald's had exploded inside the living room. Like there's wrappers
Wrappers
everywhere,
everywhere,
like
like-
half-eaten sandwiches, just like all laying around. So I will admit that
you're a McDonald's thief.
yeah. But again, this is me trying to morally justify something that was clearly black and white wrong. I was stealing trash.
Yeah.
Like I was, you know what I mean?
It had to go to the dumpster.
And I think to help me sleep at night, what I would never do is deliberately, okay, it's 12:59, we're gonna close in 1 minute. Let me make 10 McRibs.
Let me cook
Like,
a bunch of food.
yeah. That I wouldn't, because I didn't need to. There was already,
There's all the
40
food.
metric pounds of junk food sitting there for me. So, and again, I'm too lazy to do all that.
Yeah.
I'll take what I get, right?
I was gonna say, definitely when I worked at Indies, I don't remember if I was just like taking it instead of throwing it away, or if it was kind of like it has to go somewhere, so box it up and take it home. But
Yeah.
I do remember every time I worked at Indies in the evening, if I was closing, I always would have a bunch of boxes of chicken to take home.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'm like, I'm not going to eat all of this, but I think maybe you would
Yeah.
eat some sometimes, or mom. Like,
Well, I rarely say no to free food. At the same time, again, at 16, my metabolism, I could burn 1,000 calories just, going to the bathroom. So,
Ew.
so it wasn't that bad. But like I think about like grandma, like my mom used to work at, let's just call it a cigarette company. As an employee benefit, they would give them like 2 cartons of cigarettes a week, right? So there's certain places you work where you think you're getting one over on them, but it's probably to your detriment. I mean,
Yeah.
how many Big Macs is a person supposed to eat in the
right.
course of like a 96-hour period?
Right. Before
right?
they start having some serious.
I mean, it
health
wasn't like I
problems.
was taking stuff home because I worked at Fort Knox and these are gold brick. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
wasn't like I was taking stuff that was like inherently, not too good for me.
Yeah.
All right, but I'll ask you. I definitely learned some valuable interpersonal dynamic lessons
Oh,
working at
for
McDonald's
sure.
that years later, in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, they had tremendous relevance. Like, so when you were working at Arby's or like later, Indies, can you think of things that you experienced that one way or the other left an impression on you that still show up even today?
Yeah, I definitely think working in fast food and then later working in restaurants
Mm.
where I was serving or bartending. I mean, that you are dealing with every type of person
Oh, yeah.
at a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not like some specific
Yeah.
group is coming in to always eat. Like not extra personable people. It's not, sometimes it's shy people, sometimes it's mean, rude people,
No.
super happy people. So I will say that opened the door for me to just learn how to like basically become a chameleon. Like how do I need to speak with you
Yeah.
versus how do I need to treat you?
Yeah.
But having to do that quickly too, when you have a bunch of things going on in your
Yeah.
head, you're trying to remember what everyone wanted. You're trying to keep everyone happy, make everyone feel comfortable, give them a good experience. And that has now carried over into my professional career because all of the personalities I work with, I feel like I'm able to relate to
Yeah.
them a little bit on some level, and being able to read people on what I
Uh-huh.
feel like maybe they need, or at least be able to communicate and ask them, be comfortable enough. So
Yeah.
definitely working in fast food, serving, bartending, you're dealing with a whole spectrum
Yeah.
of different types of people.
Yeah.
So
Well, you obviously picked it up quicker. At McDonald's, they started me on the register, and within like 2 weeks, they're like, "You're probably more of like a cook type person," because
they're like, Get back there, please."
that I guess you get enough essentially bad Yelp reviews about the guy behind the register. The manager is going to do the right thing, and like
Move you.
you should not be the public face of this franchise. Let's go ahead and put you back here over top of these hot griddles.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like I said, I've encouraged my friends too when we were younger, when they'd be looking for jobs. I'm like, you should come work at a restaurant. I
Yeah,
feel like there is a lot to learn there. And
yeah,
I mean, some people enjoy it so much. Like I have friends that are, still they
yeah,
love bartending, they
yeah.
love serving, and they make a really, they
Oh
make
yeah,
great money doing it. But because it keeps them, out in front of different people, they're
yeah,
making other connections. And so I've always told people, like that's something you should try. If you haven't done it, that is something I think everyone should do at least
yeah,
once.
yeah. That's good. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think that my time, limited exposure to that type of job, probably imbued me with some of those same takeaways. Like, how do you manage all these different personalities? Now, on the flip side, the first job I had, it wasn't W-2 per se. I was a 1099. It
Okay.
was the opposite of, you know, retail. It was the opposite of customer facing. I had a paper route.
Okay.
And the model back
Do
then,
they still have paper routes? And like,
do they still have papers?
yeah,
Um,
I mean, I don't know. We'll have to look into that. Like,
um,
are there teenage boys delivering papers
I
anymore?
well,
There's no
well,
way.
well, it may be. Surely somebody out there is chucking
I don't know.
newspapers.
Do teenagers have jobs anymore?
Yeah, their job is to remember the 4-digit PIN for the
For
debit
their
card their
iPhone.
mommy gave them. But when I was doing it, back when I was a kid, walking uphill to school both ways, the paper route model was you essentially bought the newspapers
Hmm.
each morning. Then you would incur, like, I guess, like a debt, and then when you collected from all of the subscribers, the newspaper would back out of your revenue the cost of the newspapers,
Okay.
right? Like I was never handling all that money,
No, but
but that
that's how
was the
that
model,
worked.
right?
Yeah.
And part of that was to make sure that if somebody unsubscribed, like if you throw that paper on their doorstep, you're out the 14 cents or whatever
Yeah.
it was, like the cost to me. So I think back about that now. I would have been like, starting when I was like 13 years old. And I can't even say it was like, it's not because it's like a bad part of town or a good part of town, because, weirdos, walk amongst us no matter what zip code you're in.
Right.
But I think, okay, 7 days a week, because I delivered the Sunday paper as well. 7 days a week, I'm walking in the pitch black by myself, no cell phone, the exact same route.
How old were you?
13. And then I'm thinking,
You're like a kidnapper's dream.
oh, well, okay. So, years later, as a deer hunter, I think, when I want to go hunt deer, I scout. I try to be mindful of their pattern of life. Like
What
I
they're
put,
doing.
yeah, a deer hunt.
Someone was definitely watching
Put
you.
yourself in a position, you go to where the deer's going to be. So, years later, I'm thinking, if I was some, kidnapping pedophile, like I know exactly what I would do. Like
You're like,
yeah, and
you're
so
right
like,
there.
so I'm basically, I guess the lesson learned for me is like we needed Amber Alerts like way long ago, long before they came out, because I'm like that was like so inherently dangerous. Okay, now the other aspects of it were there was no collector that came in. Like it wasn't like I could call, a heavy to come in like a hitman and make people pay.
Hmm.
I had to go to their door, like knock, knock, knock. Big burly dude answers like, yeah, I'm here for the $7 you owe me. Like, oh, I got it. Oh, okay. Like, but
Okay.
I had
But
I
you
had
had
to
to do that.
collect. Like I had to keep going back to these people and be the collector. And
How did you get that job? Like, how do you
um,
even get a job on the paper? Like, did grandma or like?
no. So we often use the term paper boy, and then
Mhm.
earlier you talked about the kids still deliver newspapers. More often than not, well, oftentimes they're not paper boys, they're paper men or
Sure.
paper women. And so I knew of paper routes. I knew that at the time it worked out to about $5 a day.
Okay.
And the whole route took me about an hour. So $5 an hour, this was before minimum wage jumped up to $3.35.
Yeah.
That's good money. So I just got up early one morning and waited for the paper man to come through. And I just stopped and talked to him. Like,
Oh,
how did you get this route? How do you get the job? And then he gave me the phone number. I remember, I'm not going to say his name. I remember the supervisor's name, to this day. Just called the number. And yeah, there's really nothing magical about it.
but
I
that's
just,
just
I asked somebody who was doing something I wanted to do.
yeah. And they didn't gatekeep the information. They
Yeah.
helped you
That's
be
right.
able to do that.
That's right. Yep. That was it. It was that simple.
And good for you.
Yep. The takeaway though, right? Like the takeaway for me, which I saw play out later in my career when I was an aircraft mechanic, was, I just learned never ask somebody who does not already have what you have, what you can or cannot do. Like if
Oh,
you
yeah.
wanted to be a sculptor, don't let a neuroscientist tell you that you cannot be a sculptor.
Right.
Right. But I think too often, if we don't have people that are doing what we want to do in our life, we can allow people who aren't doing it to convince us why we should not,
Oh,
pursue that. And sometimes they're doing it in our own best. They think they're doing it, in our own best interest. Like,
sure.
oh, no, you don't want to do that. Well, I think it's worth having a conversation with somebody, who's doing it. So,
Yeah. It's like me when I bought a car a couple weeks ago.
mhm.
And you were like, "Oh, I don't think you should do that." I'm like, "Well,
Well, yeah. Yeah, but you're an adult. It's your money. Ultimately, do what you want. All I can do, I will give you my advice, and then once I've said it, I've said it.
yeah."
I don't need to keep revisiting it.
You did say that.
Yeah,
You were like, "This
okay,
is what my thoughts are,"
yeah,
but I'm not going to ever bring it up again.
yeah,
And then just so you all know, as soon as I bought that car, I drove right over to their house and said, "Hey, get in this thing and check it out."
yeah. And I thought about cutting the brake lines just to prove a point. All right, so Arby's, Indies. I know you had a run at Applebee's, but switching gears, like what are some other types of jobs that you had?
Definitely. So I remember working at a call center. I can't say the bank name,
Okay.
but I was actually a customer of this bank. But it was a call center where you went in, you put your phone up, you sat at a desk, and
Hmm.
and I mean it was an 8-hour shift, and they were
You
strict.
had to have hated that.
They
Like
were
you being
yes.
like stuck
Oh
in that
yeah.
one
The
spot.
windows were like this big to see. Like you had one desk. There's nothing on your desk
Yeah.
because it's not your desk.
Yeah.
You just go in and pick a desk and
Yeah.
use your login credentials, and you sit there. And the phone rings and you answer it, and you have to deal with people. I mean, usually when you're calling the bank,
Uh-huh.
85% of the time, it's not because you're really excited to tell them
Oh,
how
yeah.
great of a job they're doing. They're
Yeah.
usually
Yeah.
really
You're
angry
catching
at
it.
something. So that
And that setup
that
you
is
just
when
described almost sounds like a scene out of George Orwell's 1984. Like I imagine like the prototypical cubicle farm
yes, just
where you guys are all like just stuck in,
mhm,
a real like monolithic, just homogenous workforce.
yes,
And you just
which
wrote, ROTE, wrote, doing a mechanical type
mhm,
job. Yeah.
yeah. Which don't get me wrong, I have friends who love jobs like that.
Yeah.
Where that's where they thrive. Like they like being able to go and sit. But me personally, my personality just does not allow that. But I needed a job. I needed
Yeah.
money. That was where, someone helped me get a job there, and I was very grateful. But after a while, I realized I don't think I will ever be able to work in an office.
Yeah.
I just don't think I can ever just sit still. Um, and then I remember too, I remember you all, the solar eclipse was happening. Now this was, and maybe I'm
In
wrong.
2017.
Yes.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I feel like we just had another solar eclipse in
We did recently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
recently, like 2024.
Mhm.
Was it last year?
Mhm.
Okay, so before that, there was the one in 2017. Before that, I had not really ever heard of that. I mean,
Mhm.
I knew what that was, but
Yeah.
it wasn't this big production of like we're gonna
Yeah.
drive and go and we're gonna get a hotel and we're gonna be in the
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
But I remember you got a hotel and the whole family, the entire family was
Yeah.
going. I was the only one who they wouldn't let me off work.
Yeah.
But and it was like kind of like, do I risk losing my job or do I go to the solar eclipse with my family? But I remember sitting there thinking, you know, what like I missed out on a really great memory and a really fun time
Yeah. And,
to do that. But it just made me realize like, okay, this is not working out for me.
and
I
so
was getting resentful.
sometimes, especially when we're younger, we want to grab a hold of like this essentially passion project, like, oh, this is what's going to,
Hmm.
but, some of the best lessons I've learned were from some of the worst experiences I've had
Yeah.
because a bad experience can still serve as a good lesson because it can help you really understand what you don't want to do,
Yeah.
right? And then there's people that can maybe walk in your shoes for 3 or 4 days because you love what you do, but they might, after 72 hours, go, "Oh my gosh, I would never want to do this,"
Right.
right?
Oh, for
And so I
sure.
think we need to experience different things. You talk though, I guess the last story I'll share when you said like, look, sometimes you got to do it for money. When I was a young, like 19-year-old aircraft mechanic, turned 20, got married, had you, I was probably at that time making like, $15,000 a year. And once you back out rent, utilities, and other essentials, I had like $0 left over.
Right.
So somebody I knew said, "Have you ever thought about selling your plasma?" It's like, what's that? What's plasma? I slept through all of, high school, anatomy and physiology. So anyway, there was a plasma, they called it a plasma donation center. Like I didn't donate anything, right? You're going to take this out of my body. You're going to give me
Yeah.
money for it, right? Anyway, like the most you could do it was twice in 7 days. It had to be 48 hours between quote unquote donations. So you could do it up to 8 times a month. And it worked out to about $20 a pop.
Okay.
So $160 a month, times 12, like that 2,000-ish dollars represented like 100% of our discretionary income.
Yeah.
Then I figured out because they would play bingo like every 45 minutes, you'd be laying there, you'd have like all these tubes in your arm, you'd have a magnetic bingo card in one hand with little metal pucks you'd put on it. They played it no matter how many people were there.
Okay.
And whoever won got $10. And so after a while, I figured out that a lot of people who sell plasma don't usually sell it at 7:30 a.m. because either they're getting in from the night out and they still got pharmaceuticals in their system,
Sure.
or, there's a decent chunk of people who sell plasma that, wake up at the crack of noon. So I would either go to the plasma place like before my day shift, or I would go there straight if I was working the graveyard shift. So then there'd be times there'd only be 1 or 2 people in there. I might be the one. So I won the $10 a lot. So like I bumped my 160 to like 200, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not advocating anybody necessarily go do that. But when you talk about, look, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, drinking water. I mean, when you are doing everything you can just to get that, any way you can turn,
Oh,
a
you
dollar
get
to
creative. Yeah. I mean, you.
yeah. And I'm glad that I no longer have to do that. But I probably wouldn't, lose that memory for anything because it
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of reminds me, like, once upon a time, like you had to really grind and hustle, like to make ends meet. So
Yeah. No, I mean, I did not, I never got to the point where I did it, but I remember like looking into that because I just felt like, okay, like what else?
yeah,
I need money. Like what
yeah,
else can I
yeah,
do? So
yeah,
but I remember that being like a thing on my Google search of like,
yeah. Well, I mean,
but and so like you
I
said,
sold my plasma. Like I
it's
got
a
money for
yeah,
it.
it's a reminder of like, yeah, you get little grit and little hustle and
Yeah,
yeah,
awesome.
wouldn't change those memories. So
Yeah. Well, so I'm glad we had this conversation because little jobs like this, people who are listening, people who are watching are probably thinking like, oh yeah, like I remember before I was an
mm-hmm,
attorney, before I was an architect, before I was the general manager of this restaurant,
mm-hmm,
I too, once upon a time, XYZ. And I just think that those types of experiences are so fundamental
mm-hmm.
to shaping who we ultimately become and instilling in us a real sense of humility and thankfulness so
Yes.
that when we are fortunate enough to get to perhaps a better station in life, we remember I didn't parachute into this job.
Yeah.
I appreciate that server. I appreciate the person I have to call at the bank because I have a problem.
Mhm.
I appreciate the person who got off a graveyard shift and went to the plasma center because she decided that she wanted her kids to have more. Like
Yeah.
that just really, I think, helped me be mindful of what everybody else is doing out there that makes this world go round.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I don't think you could have said it better.
Yeah.
So,
All right, everybody. Thank you guys for listening.
right.
Tune in next time where we will keep the conversation going.
yeah, see you guys.
Take care. We hope that you enjoyed today's episode.
Yes, please make sure to like, follow, and subscribe.
See you next time.